Welcome to Discovering the Northwood from the Manitowish Waters Historical Society. We will take you on a journey through our local history with the help of primary source documentation. To learn more about this rich history or about the Historical Society, check out our website at mwhistory.org for blog posts, show notes, our YouTube channel, and a full transcription of this episode. As with many historical works from this era, there are phrases, terms, and descriptions that are inappropriate to our modern sensibilities. The Manitowish Waters Historical Society in no way condones these offensive remarks or passages. We would like to introduce the amazing journal transcribed exactly from the written work of Robert Loveless, who resided on Alder Lake and was one of the founding pioneers of the Manitowish Waters community. Robert Loveless has a comprehensive journal of his hunting, trapping, guiding, and caretaking from the earliest days of Manitowish Waters. His colorful stories, rich details, and geographic references allow this journal to come to life, providing important context to the life at the turn of the 20th century in Manitowish Waters. The following journal is read by me, Brenna Riley. One time, I went to a lake called Rock Lake. Some years ago, I was alone and out of meat, and I attempted to try and kill a deer on this lake at night about the hour of sundown. At this year, deer are very scarce, and I had to pack a birch bark canoe to this lake some distance. Anyhow, I looked all around the lake and watched close for some deer to come in the lake, but failed to see any. But the thing was, I did not have anything to eat, only a small salt and tea pail. So I knew that there were lots of fish in the lake, and it being the evening, they ought to bite good. But I did not have any line and hook to catch them with, so I got to thinking. So I took my powder horn string off, which was about 2 feet long, and I caught a small frog, and I tied the string around his belly and got by an old treetop and let it down by the side of the birch bark canoe, and I could see the fish looking at it. But they did not like to come up to it, as it seemed to me that I did not have enough line out. But I thought, if you want it, you'll have to come out and get it, as I cannot put any more line out. After a while, they began to swim around a little closer, until one grabbed it, and before he knew what it was about, I had him in the canoe, and I got 2 of them that way. They were big-mouth green bass. I had to salt and then roast them on a forked stick over the fire, but I want to say that there are lots of fish around this old top where I caught these 2 bass. One time, in about the same country, I discovered a very large buck deer with nice horns laying dead in the woods in which timber wolves had killed him. And the wolves had eaten all but one side out of him, and had not turned him over yet, and a few feet from the carcass, there was a bed of 3 wolves in the snow. I put some traps there to catch the wolves when they came back for another meal. But it seems that they did not come back in these beds. After a while, the traps were taken up, as I wanted to set them some other place for an otter, and at odd times I would go and see this deer, and one time discovered that it was all tracked up around there by a fisher and a fox. As near as I could figure was a fisher came there and had been eating on the deer and got filled up. Then was lying on top of a big log by the dead deer, and while there was a fox came back to eat his dinner, the fisher jumped on him, and all around there was black and red hair. They seemed to have had a fight for over an acre of ground, and I was trying for some time to track them, but could not get head nor tail of their tracks. So in order to find out, I made a big circle all around the logs and brush. I found where the fisher had went in the circle, and I also found the tracks of the fisher coming out of the circle, and he was dragging something in the snow. So I followed his track, and some distance away, I found where the fisher had buried something at the root of a big hemlock tree. I dug it up, and it was the hind parts of a fox, the tail still on, and was a good size. Fishers are about 5 feet from tip to tip and run in color black, brown, and pale. Some people think that they catch fish but run high. Their fur is very fine and expensive. One time in the winter of 1897, I had a line of traps out from Little Trout Lake to Big Papoose Lake. And there, hid away in the woods, I had the trapper's shack where I stayed overnight, and the next morning when I arose, I took another route from there going north to Birch Lake. From the far end of Birch Lake, I went across to another lake and stayed all night. The next morning, back to Little Trout Lake. All these trips had to be made on snowshoes. As the years, the snow seemed to be much deeper and much colder weather. We have made this trip to traps once a week, and I trapped for mink, marten fisher, beaver, otter, timber wolves, foxes, muskrats. But there was no money in trapping them, only to use their carcass to bait the traps with. One time, I did not go to my traps for 2 weeks, and when I did go and was coming up to the little cabin after a new snowfall, I discovered all kinds of fisher tracks on the roof and around the camp. The camp was very small, say in size 6 by 9 feet, poles on the top and some tar paper over them. Now, it seemed to me that there was a porcupine that dug under the shack and living there. There was no floor, and this fisher came along and killed him in there and ate him up. Up on the reach pole in the roof, when I went away the last time, I hung 5 rat carcasses in there with a string. The fisher could see them there, but in order to get to them, he went on the roof and tore a hole in the tar paper and knocked off the string and went inside to eat them. And when I arrived, he had just gone, and I threw my pack down and took after him. But it was quite late to follow him, but I kept up the chase and got in a big swamp and turned back, and I came to the shack. When the time come, I spread out my blankets and jumped in, and I jumped out again. The porcupine quill jabbed me in the back. One time years ago when I was guiding Mr. Hewitt of the Northwestern Railroad, there was another guide by the name of Ernest Freyback. Well, we talked the party up to go to Little Bear Lake for one night. Now, there were only 2 men in this party, Doc Hammond of Chicago and Mr. Hewitt of Northwestern Railroad, and 2 guides. So Freyback got them talked up to go to Little Bear Lake, and I never been there before and never went since. I don't think that Freyback has ever been there, as he got lost and I followed him, and I was lost with him as well. Well, Ernest had a birch bark canoe, some smaller than mine, as I had a bark canoe, and my canoe was 4-foot beam. Well, we started from Big Lake and went up to Little Round Lake to the inlet and went to the creek about 1.5 miles, and a trail started out from here, right in the big tamarack swamp. So we pulled our canoes out of the creek here, and Doc Hammond and Mr. Hewitt took the trail and started. All they had to carry with them was a gun apiece, and we intended to camp all night at that lake. They left all the baggage for I and Ernest to get over the trail, and there was about 100 pounds of it. And the trail was 1 3/4 mile long and bushy. Well, I and Ernest divided the 100 pounds. He took 50 and I took 50 pounds. He was a big man to the size of me, and I had the biggest birch bark canoe. It was 18 feet long and a 4-foot beam, and Ernest's was 14 feet. Well, I said, what are you going to do? Are you going to double the trail and take your 50 pounds with your canoe? And I thought that I was going to be a guide and had to dig in and do my share no matter how big the other fellow was. Well, he said, I'm going to take my 50 pounds right with my canoe. Well, I said, all right, and I knew that this was going to be a hard one on me with this 50 pounds packed in each end of my 18-foot birch bark canoe. And I did not want him over the lake fishing with these men. And I did not want him over on the lake fishing with his man, and me still doubling the trail and my man standing on the bank of the lake and fighting mosquitoes. So I started to take the whole 50 pounds as he did as well. We got packed and ready to put the canoes on our head, and he went ahead and I behind. I had not gone but a short way in this swamp, and I got stuck between 2 tamarack trees. I had too much beam. My canoe was too wide, so I had to turn the canoe up. Edge was on my neck, and you must know what this means, with a birch bark 18 feet long with 50 pounds of luggage in it. Well, I get through. Of course, Ernest was hiking along, fighting mosquitoes and carrying his canoe and his 50 pounds in it. I could see him at times through the brush and heavy timber ahead. Well, in my days and for my size, I weighed about 135 pounds. I must say I was quite a pack mule. I could carry all that I could get, the heft of it. But this canoe and this 50 pounds was more than I ought to. It took heft of, as it was a heavy load, and I'm rating this trip as I'll never forget it. I earned my $250 that day, and moored to guiding in these early days was no easy job, as most people traveled with a canoe and they liked to go to lakes that had never been fished, and I liked to take them there because I felt that they were in the wilderness and they caught lots of fish. Well, after a while, I have seen Ernest ahead, resting his canoe stuck high up in a crotch of a hemlock tree. So I came up to him. We had about a quarter mile. Well, I was caught up to him and he gets his canoe and starts off again. Well, I had to stop. My shoulders began to ache and my knees began to wobble. So I rested and went on, and after a while, I got a glimpse of Ernest again. He was still going, and after a while, I see him resting again. And this time, he did not wait till I came up to him. He just went again. Well, I came to the spot where he rested, and I took a rest and went on. So we kept this way going over the whole 1 3/4 mile, which had made the distance more than 1 3/4 mile. Now, Doc Heyman and Marvin Hewitt kept the right trail through the woods, and I followed Ernest, and he got off the right trail and took an old deer trail. The deer trail brought us out nearly the head of Little Bear Lake. But he saw the water down there through the trees. He made way for the water. Well, by going so far off way, this made the distance about 2 1/4 miles. So I kept up with him as good as I could, and finally I came to him, and he was in trouble. When he went to leave his old deer trail, I got down through the woods and thick brush to the lake. He had his man, Doc Hammond's rod and reel laying on his crossbars in his canoe, and somehow or another, the hook on the line dropped down, and he was tearing through the brush, and of course the hook in something, and then it unreeled all of Doc's line. And you maybe know what this means to have 150 feet of fish line strung through the brush over logs and among trees. Now, I must say, Ernest could swear, and when I came up to him, he was certainly making the woods ring. He was wet with sweat and fighting mosquitoes. I saw his trouble, and I said but little, as I knew he was saying enough for me and him. And I knew that this was his business, and I knew I had to paddle my own canoe. Well, this mishap with Ernest let me get ahead, and I felt somewhat better. So, while he was getting the fishing line out of the brush, I put the canoe in the lake, and Ernest came down to the lake and said, "I have to build a fire and pitch up my canoe." Well, it seemed as if he always had to do this every time he made that portage. You see, when he had his canoe on his head, he would not be careful enough and swing the front end in time when there was a tree in front of him. He would ram the front end of the canoe right into the tree and then knock off the pitch. Then before he could put it in the water, he had to pitch it up again. Well, I paddled on down the lake and see two men, Doc and Marvin, standing out on the log that ran out on the lake. And as I came near to them, I heard Marvin, my man, say, "Here comes Bob." And when I got up to them, as Ernest was not in sight, "Where's Ernest?" I said he's away up around that point pitching his canoe. Marvin said to me, "Bob, how is it that you can get ahead of that big man?" Well, I said, "I did. You see, what we oughta done was take the canoes over the trail. And when we went back and got our 50 pounds apiece, it looks to me he was trying me and do me up. He had me going that time, but our party did not know anything about this business. Well, we went fishing, and this was certainly a beautiful lake, and the water was clear as a crystal, and the trees all around the lake hung over the water. The lake was not more than 3 1/4 long and about a 1/4 wide. When we left our camp at Big Lake, we did not take anything much to eat. The party needed to catch fish and shoot something to live on. But we all went hungry on this trip, as all we caught in this lake was 3 or 4 small bass and 1 pound of pike, and 4 of us had to eat them. I and Mr. Hewitt tried at night to get a deer, but we failed. Mr. Hewitt, had a muskellunge on his hook that would weigh, I think, about 10 pounds, but he got away. We stayed all night. The first thing in the morning, we packed up and got back to Wolf Lake Creek just as soon as we had a little to eat. Then Doc and Marvin took their guns and started back over the trail. Ernest and I divided the luggage, and he soon hit the trail too. And I still was trying to get the pail and frying pan and some tin cans fixed to the crossbars of my canoe. I dreaded the trip back, but I knew I had to get back. We could not stay there, but I hurried and finally got started. And I went for some distance, but did not see anything of Ernest at all, and I had to take a rest. But I did not have the luggage fixed to my canoe as I did when I went over. I had the pans and kettles tied to the crossbars of my canoe, and they were swinging in my face and bothered me. So I made up my mind that I would take all the baggage off of the canoe and carry away down the trail and come back to get the canoe. Now this I've done, and I went far enough with that I saw Ernest taking a rest. I knew that he would take long rests, and when I saw him, I put down my baggage and ran back to get my canoe. I brought it back to the baggage, then I hooked the canoe up to the crotch of the tree. I grabbed up my stuff again and took it down the trail until I saw Ernest again resting. You see, he was resting a long time, and I was going and had a chance in packing. So I keep doing this way until I come to his last rest, and I took all my stuff right along with the canoe. When I came to the creek, he had just put his canoe down and was stretching when I came up, but none of them ever knew how I got over the trail coming back, and I never told them to think that I could pack as much as the next man, even if I was small, as tough as I was tough enough. We loaded up the canoes and went back to Big Lake and never went over there again.